I had nowhere else to go. I only thought of you.
You're safe here, Josephine. No one will hurt you.
Nathaniel, who is she?
Someone I never thought I'd see again.
Footsteps echoing down a marble hallway can shatter a marriage just as thoroughly as a whispered confession. Amelia spent 3 years building a quiet, sturdy life with her husband. It took only 4 seconds for a woman in morning silk to step through their front door and tear it apart. The library at Somerton Park always smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and the sharp, clean scent of the rain that perpetually battered the estate's western windows. Amelia sat in the wingback chair nearest the hearth, her lap weighed down by the estate's quarterly ledgers. Across from her, separated by a low mahogany table, bearing a silver tea service, sat Nathaniel. He was reading the Morning Post. He did not read like a man entirely at leisure. Even in his private rooms, the Duke of Somerton maintained a posture of rigid discipline. His shoulders were square, his jaw set, his dark hair combed precisely back. Yet, there was a softness here that he never showed the world. He had taken off his jacket, leaving him in a crisp white shirt and waistcoat. One foot was casually hooked behind the ankle of the other. Amelia ran her finger down a column of numbers, the scratch of her nib against the parchment, blending with the crackle of the fire. The tenant farms in the lower valley will need new roofing before November, Amelia said, not looking up. The thatch is rotting. Add it to the repairs draft, Nathaniel replied, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated comfortably in Amelia's chest. He turned a page of his newspaper. Have Thomas pull the funds from the timber reserves. I already told him to. Nathaniel lowered the paper just enough to meet her eyes. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a blazing, passionate grin, but it was hers. Over 3 years of an arranged marriage, they had cultivated this quiet warmth. She knew how he took his tea strong, no sugar, a splash of cold milk, and he knew that she hated the draft in the grand dining room, quietly ordering the staff to light the fires an hour before she ever came downstairs. It wasn't the fiery romance of a penny dreadful, but it was safe. It was a partnership. You are, as always, 2 steps ahead of me, Amelia, he murmured, picking up his teacup. There was a heavy knock on the heavy oak doors. Enter, Nathaniel called, his attention already returning to the news from London. The heavy doors swung open. Hodges, the butler, stepped into the room. His usually impassive face carried a slight, almost imperceptible strain around the eyes. Your Grace, Hodges said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave, you have a caller. Nathaniel didn't look up. I am not receiving callers today, Hodges. It's pouring. Tell whoever it is to leave a card and seek shelter at the village inn. Sir, Hodges hesitated. The hesitation alone was enough to make Amelia set down her pen. Hodges had worked at Somerton for 40 years. He did not hesitate. It is Lady Josephine Linfield, she insists. The teacup in Nathaniel's hand froze. Amelia watched him. It was a matter of inches, a matter of milliseconds, but the transformation was absolute. The relaxed hook of his ankles unspooled, the broad shoulders locked into defensive iron. He didn't gasp, he didn't drop the cup, but the tendons in his neck corded, and the knuckles of the hand gripping the delicate porcelain turned completely white. He lowered the cup to the saucer. It rattled, a sharp, violent clatter against the silver tray. Show her in, Nathaniel said. His voice was entirely devoid of its previous warmth. It was hollow, scraped out. Amelia frowned, standing up and smoothing the skirts of her morning dress. Nathaniel, who is Lady Josephine? He didn't look at her. He stood up, violently brushing an invisible piece of lint from his trousers, his eyes fixed dead on the open doorway. An old acquaintance, he said stiffly. Before Amelia could press further, the sound of soft, urgent footsteps filled the corridor. A woman appeared in the doorway. She was drenched. The heavy black morning silk of her traveling dress clung to her frame, heavy with rainwater, pooling darkly on the Persian rug. The veil of her bonnet was pushed back, revealing a face completely devoid of color, yet striking enough to pull the air from the room. She had large, dark, desperate eyes, framed by damp tendrils of chestnut hair. She looked exhausted, chaotic, and entirely out of place in the meticulously ordered library. She did not look at Amelia. Her eyes found Nathaniel and stayed there. "Josephine," Nathaniel breathed. It wasn't a greeting. It sounded like an involuntary reflex, a word torn from the base of his throat. "He's dead, Nat," she said. Her voice was trembling, raw. "Richard is dead. The cholera took him in Paris. I didn't know where else to go." Nathaniel closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't touch her, but he hovered so close that the damp cold radiating off her cloak seemed to seep into his own clothes. His hands twitched at his sides, rising a fraction of an inch before forcing themselves back down to his pockets. "You are freezing," he said, his voice thick, entirely unrecognizable to Amelia. He turned sharply to Hodges, who was lingering in the hall. "Draw a bath in the east wing. Have Mrs. Gable bring hot broth and brandy. Now." "Yes, Your Grace." Only then did Josephine seem to realize there was another person in the room. Her dark, wet eyes slid from Nathaniel's face to Amelia, who was still standing by the wingback chair, the estate ledger clutched to her chest like a shield. "Oh," Josephine whispered, taking a half step back, her hand fluttering to her throat. "Forgive me. I am intruding. You must be." "My wife," Nathaniel supplied. He finally turned to look at Amelia, but his eyes were glassy, unfocused. He was looking at her, but he was not seeing her. "Amelia, this is Lady Josephine Linfield, a childhood friend of my family." "I am so sorry for your loss, Lady Josephine," Amelia said, keeping her voice even and polite. She stepped forward, gesturing to the hearth. "Please, come by the fire. You are shivering." Josephine offered a weak, tragic smile. "You are very kind, Your Grace, but I shouldn't have come. It was a mistake. I was simply out of my mind with the journey. I should go to the inn." She turned toward the door. "Don't be absurd," Nathaniel snapped. The sharpness of his tone made both women flinch. He let out a harsh breath, dragging a hand through his perfectly combed hair, ruining the neatness of it. "You are not staying at an inn, Josie. You are staying here for as long as you need." "Josie." Amelia stood quietly by the fire. She watched the way Nathaniel's eyes tracked a single droplet of rain as it slid down Josephine's pale cheek. She watched the way Josephine's shoulders slumped in relief, leaning just an inch toward Nathaniel's chest without actually making contact. Amelia looked down at the ledger in her hands. The ink on the page she had been writing on was smeared, ruined by a stray drop of spilled tea. Within a fortnight, the haunting of Somerton Park was complete. Josephine did not behave like an intruder. She was relentlessly polite, painfully grateful, and deeply grieving. She spent her mornings in the garden, her afternoons reading quietly in the sunroom, and her evenings dining with Amelia and Nathaniel. She never demanded attention, yet she absorbed all of it. Amelia's realization did not arrive like a lightning strike. It seeped into her bones, cold and slow, through a dozen quiet, damning details. It started with the blue silk. During Amelia's first season as the Duchess of Somerton, Nathaniel had ordered a custom gown for her to wear to the royal ball. He had been highly specific about the color, a deep, twilight sapphire. "It suits you," he had told her, fastening a diamond clasp at her neck. "It brings out the life in your skin." Amelia had cherished that dress. It hung in her wardrobe, a symbol of the moment she believed her husband had truly began to care for her. On the 12th day of Josephine's stay, the mourning period strictly allowed her to transition to half-mourning colors. She came down to dinner wearing a gown of deep, twilight sapphire. "I found it in one of my old trunks," Josephine remarked lightly as Amelia stared at the fabric. "It is an old thing. Nathaniel bought the bolt of silk for me in London. Oh, it must be 5 years ago now. Just before I left for Paris." Amelia's fork paused against her porcelain plate. She looked across the long dining table at her husband. Nathaniel was staring intently at his wine glass, refusing to meet her eye. His jaw was locked tight. "It is a lovely color," Amelia managed to say, her throat feeling coated in dust. "Nat always had an eye for it," Josephine smiled, a sad, nostalgic curve of her lips. That night, Amelia sat at her vanity, dismissing her maid. She stared at her own reflection in the silver-backed mirror. She opened the small velvet box on her dressing table and took out her favorite perfume, Lily of the Valley. Nathaniel had gifted it to her on their first anniversary. She had worn it every day since. She unscrewed the glass stopper. The floral scent filled the air. Just hours earlier, Amelia had walked past Josephine in the hallway. The widow had smelled, overwhelmingly, unmistakably, of Lily of the Valley. Amelia carefully screwed the stopper back into the bottle. She pushed it to the far corner of the vanity. She felt the distinct, hollow drop of her stomach, like missing a step in the dark. It wasn't just a shared history between her husband and this woman. It was an architecture of grief. Nathaniel had not been building a life with Amelia over the last 3 years. He had been meticulously constructing a replica of the woman he had lost. The absolute confirmation came 3 days later. It was a Tuesday evening. The rain had returned, confining them all to the drawing room. Amelia was working on a piece of embroidery near the fire. Nathaniel was seated by the window, a book resting unread on his knee. Josephine was at the grand piano. She was playing Chopin. Her fingers moved over the keys with a practiced, effortless melancholy. Amelia watched the scene over the rim of her embroidery hoop. She watched Nathaniel. He didn't know he was being observed. His mask of polite, aristocratic indifference had completely slipped. He was staring at Josephine's back, at the slope of her neck, where her dark hair was pinned up. The look on his face was one of absolute, unprotected starvation. It was raw. It was a man dying of thirst, looking at a glass of water just out of his reach. Amelia's chest tightened so violently she thought her ribs might crack. In 3 years of marriage, in the darkness of their bedroom, in the quiet mornings by the fire, he had never looked at her like that. Not once. Josephine finished the piece. The final chord hung in the air, fading into the sound of the rain. She turned on the piano bench, looking over her shoulder at Nathaniel. "I'm out of practice," she said softly. "You play it exactly as I remember," Nathaniel replied. His voice was thick, practically a whisper. Amelia slowly lowered her embroidery. She set the needle down on the side table. The tiny click of metal against wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Both Nathaniel and Josephine jumped, turning to look at her, as if they had entirely forgotten she was sitting 10 feet away. And they had. She could see it in their eyes. The sudden guilt, the rapid readjustment of reality. "I am going to retire," Amelia said, her voice perfectly level, completely devoid of emotion. "My head aches." "Shall I call for the doctor?" Nathaniel asked, sitting forward, the mask of the dutiful husband sliding back into place with practiced ease. "No," Amelia said, standing up. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she looked at his face, she would scream, and she refused to give them the satisfaction of a scene. "I simply need rest. Good night, Lady Josephine." "Good night, Your Grace," Josephine murmured, her eyes dropping to the floor. Amelia walked out of the drawing room, her spine perfectly straight. She climbed the grand staircase, step by step, the silence of the massive house pressing in on her ears. She did not go to her bedroom. She turned down the opposite corridor, pushing open the door to Nathaniel's private study. She lit a single oil lamp on his desk. She wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for until she pulled open the bottom drawer of his heavy oak desk. It was locked, but Amelia knew where he kept the spare key tucked behind the bronze inkwell. She unlocked the drawer. Inside lay a stack of estate documents, a few old letters tied with string, and a leather-bound sketchbook. Amelia pulled the sketchbook out. It was old, the leather worn soft at the corners. She opened it to the first page. It was a charcoal sketch of a woman's profile. Josephine. She turned the page. Josephine reading in a garden. Josephine laughing, her head thrown back. Josephine standing by a window, wearing a gown of dark silk. Amelia turned to the final sketch in the book. It was heavily worked, the charcoal smudged in places as if the artist had rubbed it with his thumb. It was Josephine, wearing a very specific, complicated arrangement of braids pinned to the crown of her head. Beneath the drawing, in Nathaniel's precise handwriting, was a date. It was dated 2 months before Nathaniel had proposed to Amelia. Amelia raised a trembling hand to her own head, tracing the intricate braids her maid had pinned to her crown that very morning. Nathaniel had requested she wear her hair this way for their wedding. He had said it was elegant. He had said it suited her. She looked back down at the date on the paper. Amelia slowly closed the sketchbook. She set it back in the drawer, locked it, and put the key behind the inkwell. She blew out the oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness. She stood alone in the dark study, listening to the rain against the glass, finally understanding the shape of her own marriage. She was not a wife. She was an understudy, standing on a stage, speaking lines written for a woman who had finally returned to claim her role. Morning light in Somerton Park usually filtered gray and weak through the heavy draperies, but today Amelia threw them wide open. She sat at her vanity table and watched her maid, Clara, retrieve the silver hairpins from the porcelain tray. "The usual braided crown, Your Grace?" Clara asked, her fingers already beginning to section the heavy waves of Amelia's hair. "No," Amelia said. Her voice was flat, anchored by a new, heavy resolve. "Brush it out, a simple chignon at the nape of my neck, nothing else." Clara paused, catching Amelia's eye in the mirror. "But His Grace always prefers." "I do not care what His Grace prefers, Clara," Amelia interrupted, neither raising her voice nor softening it. "And the blue silk day dress. Pack it in the cedar trunk in the attic, along with the twilight velvet." Clara blinked, her hands dropping to her sides. "Are we storing the winter clothes so soon, ma'am?" "We are storing those dresses permanently." Amelia stood up. She walked over to the corner of the vanity, picked up the glass bottle of Lily of the Valley perfume, and held it out. "Take this. Give it to one of the scullery maids, or throw it in the ash pit. I never want to smell it in these rooms again." When Amelia entered the breakfast room an hour later, she wore a dress of severe, dark olive wool. Her hair was pinned low and tight. She smelled only of the simple lavender soap she had brought with her from her father's house 3 years ago. Nathaniel was already at the table, a plate of eggs and toast untouched before him. Josephine sat across from him, sipping tea, her dark hair arranged in soft, familiar curls. As Amelia pulled out her chair, Nathaniel looked up. His eyes tracked over the olive wool, moving upward to the stark arrangement of her hair, and finally settling on her face. A subtle wrinkle appeared between his brows. He opened his mouth, perhaps to comment on the change, but the heavy silence in the room seemed to suffocate the words before they could form. He closed his mouth and looked down at his plate. Amelia ate her toast methodically. She did not engage in the quiet, murmured conversation between her husband and his guest. She simply observed. She watched how Nathaniel anticipated Josephine's needs, passing the marmalade before she asked for it, ordering the footman to adjust the window draft because Josephine rubbed her arms. Over the next 2 weeks, Amelia systematically stripped the ghost from her own bones. She stopped ordering the fires lit early in the dining room. Let Nathaniel feel the chill. She stopped adjusting the estate ledgers to cover his oversights. Let the steward bring the discrepancies directly to him. She reclaimed her own habits, retreating to the small, sunless morning room she had favored when she first arrived at Somerton, reading her own books, and taking solitary walks on the moors, regardless of the rain. The distance between husband and wife widened into an unbridgeable chasm, yet Nathaniel seemed too paralyzed by Josephine's presence to address it. He was a man split down the middle, living in a house with the woman he had married, and the woman he had never stopped mourning. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday. Amelia was in the morning room, sealing a letter to her sister, when Nathaniel walked in. He didn't knock. He looked haggard, the sharp lines of his face drawn tight with fatigue. "Thomas tells me you have refused to review the quarterly accounts," Nathaniel said, closing the door behind him. "And you dismissed the housekeeper's inquiries about the autumn menu." "I am stepping back from the household management," Amelia replied, pressing her brass seal into the hot red wax. "You are the Duchess of Somerton. It is your duty, is it?" Amelia finally looked up. She held his gaze, her expression completely steady. "I thought my duty was merely to wear sapphire silk, smell of summer flowers, and pin my hair to mimic a woman who was living in Paris." Nathaniel physically recoiled. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. He stared at her, his jaw working as if trying to chew through stone. "What are you talking about?" he managed to say, though the hoarseness of his voice betrayed him. "I went into your study, Nathaniel. I saw the sketchbook." Amelia stood up from the desk. She didn't yell. The tragedy of the moment didn't require volume. It was devastating, entirely on its own. "I know exactly what you built with me. I know exactly whose shadow I have been standing in for 3 years. Amelia, you don't understand," he started, taking a step toward her, his hand reaching out. She stepped back. "Do not touch me." His hand dropped. He looked at the floor, his broad shoulders suddenly caving inward. "When she married Richard, I thought it would kill me," he whispered, confessing to the floorboards. "And then I met you. You were quiet. You were kind. You grounded me. You." "I was a blank canvas," Amelia finished for him, "and you painted her face over mine. You dressed me in her colors. You gave me her scent. I thought you were paying attention to me. I thought you were learning my shape, but you were just chiseling me down to fit her mold." "That isn't true," Nathaniel said, but he couldn't look her in the eye. The lie was too weak to carry any weight in the room. "I care for you, Amelia. We have a good life." "We had a play, a performance." Amelia walked past him, moving toward the door. "But the leading lady has returned to the stage, Nathaniel. The understudy is no longer required." Heavy trunks thumped against the floorboards of the main hall. The sound echoed up the grand staircase, bouncing off the oil portraits of past dukes and duchesses of Somerton. Amelia stood by the front doors, drawing on her leather gloves. She wore a traveling suit of charcoal gray. Her carriage stood waiting in the gravel drive, the horses snorting plumes of white vapor into the damp, cold morning air. Hodges stood nearby, holding the door open. His eyes, usually entirely unreadable, carried a deep, profound sadness. "The luggage is loaded, Your Grace," Hodges said quietly. "Thank you, Hodges," Amelia replied. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a heavy ring of brass keys. The keys to the pantries, the cellars, the strong boxes, the keys to Somerton. She placed them on the silver salver on the hall table. The metal clinked sharply against the silver. Footsteps rushed down the stairs. Nathaniel took the last 3 steps in a single jump. He wore no jacket. His shirt was untucked at the side, and he looked entirely unraveled. He had spent the last 48 hours trying to convince her to stay, oscillating between quiet pleas and desperate anger. Amelia had packed anyway. "You cannot simply leave," Nathaniel said, his chest heaving as he stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "People will talk. The scandal." "Let them talk," Amelia said, buttoning her left glove. "Tell them I went to the country for my health. Tell them I lost my mind. Tell them whatever you need to maintain your precious order." "Amelia, please." He closed the distance between them. He looked at her, truly looked at her. Perhaps for the first time, without looking for someone else. He saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the quiet dignity that required no silk or elaborate braids. She is broken. She is grieving her husband. What we had in the past, it's gone. It's over. Is it? Amelia asked softly. Because when she plays the piano, you look at her like she is the only oxygen left in the world. Nathaniel flinched. You love a ghost, Nathaniel. You have been suffocating in a haunted house of your own making. Amelia looked past him, up to the landing. Josephine stood there, clutching the wooden banister. She was wearing her black mourning dress again. She looked down at them, her wide, dark eyes filled with a complicated mixture of guilt, fear, and an undeniable, territorial claim. She did not say a word. She didn't need to. Her presence was heavy enough to crush the breath from the room. Amelia looked back at her husband. She is here now. You don't have to pretend with me anymore. I don't want her, Nathaniel lied. It was a desperate, panicked lie. He reached out and grabbed Amelia's wrist. His grip was tight, trembling. I want the life we built. You built it, Amelia corrected, gently prying his fingers off her arm, one by one. I was just the raw material. And I am entirely exhausted by it. She turned her back on him. She walked through the heavy oak doors, stepping out into the cold, crisp air of the morning. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world smelling of wet earth and pine. It was an honest smell. The footman handed her up into the carriage. She sat on the velvet bench, keeping her spine straight. Drive, she ordered. The coachman cracked the whip. The wheels crunched violently against the gravel, pulling the heavy carriage forward. Amelia did not look back at the grand stone facade of Somerton Park. She did not look at the man standing in the doorway, realizing too late that in his desperate attempt to preserve an illusion, he had destroyed the only real thing he possessed. She looked out the window, watching the iron gates of the estate draw closer, feeling the cold, phantom weight of a stranger's life finally lifting from her shoulders. Did Amelia make the right choice by walking away, or should she have fought for her marriage? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you loved this deep dive into historical heartbreak and betrayal, be sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a good romance drama, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more grounded, emotional storytelling every single week.